Terrain models created using the Open Roads technology tools add a level of intelligence to the terrain model called rules. The rules allow the terrain model to preserve a link to the source data so it can be updated when revisions are made to the source data. This has very powerful implications for both existing ground and design terrain models. For example, as survey data is enhanced and corrected, the terrain model can automatically update to the newest information. Terrain models of a design are automatically updated as changes are made, such as geometry and template changes. Unlike the past when DTMs and TINs were a result of a design process, terrain models are a dynamic representation of the current source data. When you lock a terrain, it will temporarily deactivate rules. Rules can be deactivated when the Edit Terrain Model tools need to be used. While locked, edits to source data do not update terrain models. Unlock is the default state of a terrain model with the rules linking to the source data. Edits to sources are updated in terrain model automatically or using the Update from Source tool. Edit Terrain Model tools are not available when unlocked. If previous edits were made to the Edit Terrain Model tools, they will be lost when the terrain model is unlocked and the rules activated again. Removing the rules will improve the performance of a terrain model, and this is recommended for all large terrain models. Features can still be added, removed, and modified after the rules have been removed. Terrain models with the rules removed can be merged and appended into complex terrain models. Once removing rules, they cannot be reactivated. The link to the source is broken permanently. Removing the rules is recommended when sharing a terrain model with non-civil users such as microstation, plant, or building users. When the source is imported from graphics, text, native formats, or other data, rules are created that link the terrain model to the source data. All edits and updates should be made to the source data. So if the terrain originated from a field book, then the field book should be what is edited. The updates are propagated to the terrain model either automatically or using the Update from Source tool. The terrain will display changes that have been made. Once all the changes are complete, you are ready to clean up the edge triangles. The edge method defines which triangles around the edge of the terrain model get created. There are two options to control edge triangles. The terrain model is updated dynamically when the edge method changes, so if the results are not acceptable, change the value until the results are acceptable. Only triangles along the edge of the terrain model are affected by this parameter. Interior triangles are never removed. When using slivers, long narrow sliver triangles along the edge of the terrain model are removed, and there are no parameters to control what a sliver triangle is. When using maximum triangle length, triangles along the edge of the terrain model whose edge is longer than the specified length are removed. For most, after the edge method is defined, the terrain model is ready for use. Optionally, additional terrain model edits may be done. The Edit Terrain Model tools provide limited editing without returning to the source data. It is also recommended to make edits to the source data whenever possible. These tools should only be used for minor edits and when returning to the source data is not possible. The Edit Terrain Model tools should be used on unruled terrain models. Sounding backwards to some, the Lock Deactivate Rule tool on the heads-up menu is used to set the terrain model into an unruled state. When the source is imported, the terrain model remains linked to the source data. All edits and updates should be made to the source data, and updates propagate into the terrain model. Rules linking to source data takes a higher priority than manual edits with the Edit Terrain Model tools. The Civil Message Center displays errors, warnings, and messages related to Open Roads technology elements, including terrain model elements. Geometry and other design warnings are also displayed here. By default, the Civil Message Center is docked in the lower left corner. If the Civil Message Center is not visible, select the Civil Message Center tool, which is a red flag icon from the General Geometry task menu. The source data for the terrain model may be incomplete or incorrect, requiring the use of Add Feature, Remove Feature, and Change Feature Type tools to help redefine the terrain model. The Report Crossing Features and Report Conflicting Points tools identify potential problems, points or linear features that conflict with another point are reported. An elevation tolerance can be specified to limit the number of conflicts reported. Only points or linear features that are at the same x and y position and give a difference in elevation greater than the elevation tolerance are reported as conflicts. Right-click on conflicts listed in the window to zoom to the location of the conflict and be presented with options to correct the conflict. Now let's take a look at practice exercise where we're going to update, do some editing and analyzing of our terrain using tools that we've just mentioned. Okay, we want to remain in the Create from Graphics DGN file and open the Civil Message Center. So the Civil Message Center is not already docked at the bottom left. You can get to the Civil Message Center by going to your General Geometry Tools and clicking on the red flag icon, and that will bring the Civil Message Center up. So go ahead and go to that Civil Message Center. And the way that this is set up, you've got these items highlighted, and you deselect those and it only shows you what has a box around it. So right now my 3 warnings are the only thing showing because that's the only thing that's highlighted. Now we want to right click on the first warning in the message center and hit zoom to, and your view will update and you can see the warning sign here. We want to zoom in really close until we can see the conflict. We've got 2 features overlapping, and so you can see what's happening here. So I'm going to go to modify feature or modify element and snap to one end and move it to the other end. So you can see my snaps here. We're going to take this line and we're going to snap it to the end of the other line. And I no longer have a conflict. You go to your Civil Message Center and you can see that first conflict was removed. Go ahead and repeat steps as previously done. We can right click on the next warning and zoom to, and then we can zoom in really close into that warning and see that there are 2 lines that cross. So I'm going to again modify element, click on one endpoint and connect it to the other endpoint, and it fixes that warning. And we want to do that for the last one as well. So I can right click and zoom to, and I can zoom in to the crossing feature, and I want to take this endpoint right here and connect it to this endpoint. And we're zoomed in well enough that our X and Y is not that important for this exercise. Now we want to go ahead and fit our view. You'll notice now that we have a fit view, there are 2 or 3 buildings that have not been included in our terrain. You can zoom into those 2 buildings, and we're going to add those into our terrain, and they're currently on E-site building instead of E-struck building. The reason why those were not added. So to add those features, I'm going to go to my terrain modeling tools and click on add features. We want to follow the heads up prompt that tells you to locate your terrain model element. So I'm going to left click on my triangles. Now it says locate the element to add. I'm going to left click on this building, followed by a left click on the second building, and when we're done we can right click to reset, and we want to set the feature type to void. So I left click and set that to void to accept. If it's not set to void, you can hit your up and down arrow key on your keyboard to change that feature type to void. So again, left click to accept, and those features get added. Now we want to zoom to the other problem building at the southern part of the project, and you can see right now this is currently brought in as a break line. We need to change this to a void. So I'm going to change my tool to change feature type. Make sure my feature type is set to void. Locate the terrain linear feature. I'm going to left click on the terrain, and we don't want to select any other feature, so I can right click when I'm done. Set the feature type to void, left click to accept, and that's changed. So we've got one building that was changed and these other 2 buildings here that were added to the terrain. Now I want to select the Crossing Features tool, Report Crossing Features. And again, follow the heads-up prompt. Select the terrain model element. So left-click on your terrain. Left-click to apply an elevation tolerance if you say yes. And left-click to set the elevation tolerance to 0.1. Brings up our report on the crossing features. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so I can still see my screen. And I'm going to right-click on the first crossing feature report in the list and zoom to that. And if I zoom out a little bit, see where those cross. And in this situation, we have a red feature, which is a general elevation break line. And then the blue is a boundary for a traffic island. We want to actually just remove the red feature. So we're going to right-click in this list on our crossing feature report, and we're going to delete feature 1. Right-click on the remaining warning and select Zoom to, and zoom out to make your features visible. In this example, we have two break lines that are crossing and they don't meet our minimum tolerance. So an acceptable solution for this situation would be to add a point where those two intersect at an average elevation between the two lines. So I can right-click and insert point into both features at an elevation that is average elevation. Close this dialog and fit the view, and we want to do an element information on our terrain. So click on your terrain and go to element information, and I will unpin that from the side. And we want to look at the edge method section. Currently our edge method is set to slivers, and we're going to change that to a maximum triangle length. And we want to set the maximum triangle length to 100 feet. So I key in a value of 100, hit enter, and it updates my terrain. And you can see the boundary updating as well. No longer have triangles cutting across where there's no data.